Good morning and welcome to day 41 of Bible in a Year. As we explore the Bible in 365 days from Genesis to Revelation, we talk about the greatest love story, this love story between God and God's people. We are going through the adventure timeline created by Jeff Cavins. The period we are on right now, on day 41, is Egypt and Exodus. My name is Pastor Jay Lutz, and today we are going to be doing Exodus 23, Leviticus 16, and Psalm 77. Now, Exodus 23 talks about, both Exodus and Leviticus talk about Moses at the tent of meeting, and God tells him about, in Exodus 23, the laws of justice and mercy, the Sabbath laws, 3 annual festivals the people of Israel are to attend. The first one being the Feast of Unleavened Bread, better known as Passover. We as Christians celebrate this at the time of Easter, as Jesus is the Passover lamb who was slaughtered for each and every one of us to atone for all of our sins, so that we might have forgiveness and be welcomed into the kingdom of heaven. They also had the Feast of the Harvest of the First Fruits. This one is better known for us as Pentecost. Remember, this is 50 days after Easter, and this is when we celebrate the beginning of the church. This is when the Holy Spirit came upon the people and they worshipped God in spirit and in truth. And then lastly, the last one they were to gather together for was the Feast of Ingathering. We celebrate as a church Thanksgiving. This is bringing in the crops. And then lastly, in Exodus 23, God prepares his people with his angels to journey into the land of Canaan, the promised land. And so he tells them stipulations of going into the promised land. In Leviticus chapter 16, God tightens the rules around approaching the altar after Aaron's 2 sons die. And so God says to Aaron, he then can't just come in whenever he wants into God's presence, but God will set apart a time, the Day of Atonement, for Aaron and his descendants for the coming years to approach the Holy of Holies. This is what the area where God is, where he resides in the mercy seat above the Ark of the Covenant. And in the temple, it's a specific place called the Holy of Holies. But this is still in the tent of meeting. And lastly, Psalm 77 is a song of Asaph for Jeduthun, who is the director of music at the time. This is a song of petition. So let's get into it. Exodus chapter 23. Do not spread false reports. Do not help a wicked man by being a malicious witness. Do not follow the crowd in doing wrong. When you give testimony in a lawsuit, do not pervert justice by siding with the crowd. Do not show favoritism to a poor man in his lawsuit. If you come across your enemy's ox or donkey wandering off, be sure to take it back to him. If you see the donkey of someone who hates you fallen down under its load, do not leave it there. Be sure you help him with it. Do not deny justice to poor people in their lawsuits. Have nothing to do with a false charge, and do not put an innocent or honest person to death, for I will not acquit the guilty. Do not accept a bribe, for a bribe blinds those who see and twists the words of the righteous. Do not oppress an alien. You yourself know what it feels to be aliens, because you were aliens in Egypt. For 6 years you were to sow your fields and crops, but during the 7th year let the land lie unplowed and unused. And the poor amongst your people may get food from it, and wild animals might eat what they leave. Do the same with your vineyards and your olive groves. 6 days do your work, but on the 7th day do not work, so that your ox and your donkey may rest, and the slave born in your household and the alien as well may be refreshed. Be careful to do everything I have said to you. Do not invoke the names of other gods. Do not let them be heard on your lips. 3 times a year you are to celebrate a festival to me. Celebrate the festival of unleavened bread for 7 days. Eat bread made without yeast, as I commanded you. Do this at the appointed time in the month of Abib, for in the month you came out of Egypt. No one is to appear before me empty-handed. Celebrate the Feast of Harvest with the first fruits of the crop. you sow in your field. Celebrate the feast of ingathering at the end of the year when you gather in your crops from the fields. 3 times a year, all the men are to appear before the sovereign Lord. Do not offer the blood of a sacrifice to me along with anything containing yeast. The fat of my festival offering must not be kept until morning. Bring the best of the first fruits of your soil to the house of the Lord your God. Do not cook a young goat in its mother's milk. See also I am sending an angel ahead of you to guard you along the way and to bring you to the place I prepared. Pay attention to him and listen to what he says. Do not rebel against him. He will not forgive your rebellion, since my name is in him. If you listen carefully to what he says and do all that I say, I will be an enemy to your enemies, and I will oppose those who oppose you. My angel will go ahead of you and bring you into the land of the Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Canaanites, Hivites, Jebusites, and I will wipe them out. Do not bow down before their gods or worship them or follow their practices. You must demolish them and break their sacred stones to pieces. Worship the Lord your God, and his blessing will be on your food and water. I will take away sickness from among you, and none will miscarry or be barren in your land. I will give you a full lifespan. I will send my terror ahead of you and throw into confusion every nation you encounter. I will make all enemies turn their back and run. I will send the hornet ahead of you to drive out the Hivites, Canaanites, and Hittites out of your way. But I will not drive them out in a single year, because the land would become desolate, and the wild animals far too numerous for you. Little by little I will drive them out before you, until you have increased enough to take possession of the land. I will establish your borders from the Red Sea to the Sea of the Philistines, and from the desert to the river. I will hand over to you the people who live in the land, and you will drive them out before you. Do not make a covenant with them or with their gods. Do not let them live in your land, or they will cause you to sin against me, because the worship of their gods will certainly be a snare to you. Here ends our first reading. Our second reading comes from Leviticus chapter 16. The Lord spoke to Moses after the death of 2 sons of Aaron, who died when they approached the Lord. The Lord said to Moses, "Tell your brother Aaron not to come whenever he chooses into the most holy place behind the curtain, in front of the atonement cover on the ark, or else he will die, because I appeared in the cloud over the atonement cover." This is how Aaron is to enter the sanctuary area: with a young bull for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering. He is to put on the sacred linen tunic with linen undergarments next to his body. He is to tie the linen sash around him and put on the linen turban. These are sacred garments, so he must bathe himself with water before he puts them on. For the Israelite community, he is to take 2 male goats for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering. Aaron is to offer the bull for his own sin offering to make atonement for himself and his household. Then he is to take the 2 goats and present them before the Lord at the entrance of the tent of meeting. He is to cast lots for the 2 goats, one lot for the Lord and the other for the scapegoat. Aaron shall bring the goat whose lot falls into the Lord and sacrifice it for a sin offering. But the goat chosen by the lot as a scapegoat shall be presented alive before the Lord to be used for making atonement by sending him into the desert as a scapegoat. Aaron shall bring the bull for his own sin offering to make atonement for himself and his household, and he is to slaughter the bull for his own sin offering. He is to take a censer full of burning coals from the altar before the Lord, and 2 handfuls of finely ground fragments of incense, and take them behind the curtain. He is to put the incense on the fire before the Lord, and the smoke of the incense will conceal the atonement cover above the testimony, so that he will not die. He is to take some of the bull's blood with his finger, sprinkle it on the front of the atonement cover. Then he will sprinkle some of it with the finger 7 times before the atonement cover. He shall then slaughter the goat for the sin offering for the people and take its blood behind the curtain, and do with it as he did with the bull's blood. He shall sprinkle it on the atonement cover in front of it. In this way he will make atonement for the most holy place because of the uncleanness and rebellion of the Israelites, whatever their sins have been. He is to do the same for the tent of meeting, which is among them in the midst of their uncleanness. No one is to be in the tent of meeting from the time Aaron goes in to make atonement in the most holy place until he comes out, having made atonement for himself, his household, and the whole community of Israel. Then he shall come out to the altar that is before the Lord and make atonement for it. He shall take some of the bull's blood and some of the goat's blood and put it on all the horns of the altar. He shall sprinkle some of the blood on it with his finger 7 times to cleanse it and to consecrate it from the uncleanliness of the Israelites. When Aaron has finished making atonement for the most holy place, the tent of meeting, and the altar, he shall bring forward the live goat. He is to lay both hands on the head of the live goat and confess over it all the wicked and rebellion of the Israelites, all their sins, and put them on the goat's head. He shall send the goat away into the desert in the care of a man appointed for the task. The goat will carry on itself all their sins to a solitary place, and the man shall release it in the desert. Then Aaron is to go into the tent of meeting and take off the linen garment he put on before he entered the most holy place, and he is to leave them there. He shall bathe himself with water in a holy place, and put on his regular garments. Then he shall come out, sacrifice the burnt offering for himself, and the burnt offering for the people, to make atonement for himself and for the people. He shall also burn the fat to the sin offering on the altar. The man who releases the goat as a scapegoat must wash his clothing and bathe himself with water. Afterwards he must come into the camp. The bull and the goat for the sin offering, whose blood was brought into the most high place, to make atonement, must be taken outside the camp. Their hides, flesh, and offal are to be burned up. The man who burns them must wash his clothes and bathe himself with water. Afterwards he may come in to the camp. This is to be a lasting ordinance for you. On the 10th day of the 7th month you must deny yourself, and do not any work, whether native born or an alien living among you, because on this day atonement will be made for you to cleanse you. Then before the Lord you will be clean from all your sins. It is a Sabbath of rest, and you must deny yourself. It is a lasting ordinance. The priest who is anointed and ordained to succeed his father as high priest is to make atonement. He is to put on the sacred linen garments and make atonement for the most high place, for the tent of meeting, and the altar, and for the priest and all the people of the community. This is to be a lasting ordinance for you. Atonement is to be made once a year for all the sins of the Israelites. And it was done as the Lord commanded Moses. There ends our second reading. Our third reading is Psalm 77, a psalm of Asaph. I cried out to God for help. I cried out to God to hear me. When I was in distress, I sought the Lord at night. I stretched out untiring hands, and my soul refused to be comforted. I remembered you, O God, and I groaned. I mused, and my spirit grew faint. You kept my eyes from closing. I was too troubled to speak. I thought about the former days, the years of long ago. I remember my songs in the night. My heart mused and my spirit inquired, will the Lord reject forever? Will he never show his favor again? Has his unfailing love vanished forever? Has his promise failed for all times? Has God forgotten to be merciful? Has he in anger withheld his compassion? Then I thought, to this I will appeal, the years of the right hand of the Most High. I will remember the deeds of the Lord. Yes, I will remember your miracles of long ago. I will meditate on all your works and consider all your mighty deeds. Your ways, O God, are holy. What God is so great as our God? You are the God who performs miracles. You display your power amongst the people. With your mighty arm you redeem your people, the descendants of Jacob and Joseph. The waters saw you, O God. The waters saw you and wreathed. The very depths were convulsed. The clouds poured down water. The skies resounded with thunder. Your arrow flashed back and forth. Your thunder was heard in the whirlwind. Your lightning lit up the world. The earth trembled and quaked. Your path led through the sea, your way through the mighty waters. Though your footprints were not seen, you led your people like a flock by the hand of Moses and Aaron. Here ends our last reading. I think I say this for every psalm, but they're also very beautiful. It explains the works of God here. The mighty miracles displayed before. It says the waters saw you, O God, and they wreathed, they convulsed, they poured down water, and then it talks about, how all these mighty acts happened before you, O God, because you were mighty. Things like thunder and lightning lighting up the sky and earth trembling and quaking just shows the magnitude of God and how We are to cry out to God that he might hear our distress, that he might reach out his hand and comfort us. For God does not refuse a comfort for those who need comfort. Beautiful. Leviticus, we learn about the Day of Atonement. Now God sets aside a specific time span for Moses and the priests, the high priest, then it is later called, that must come before and make atonement. We see Aaron does this here, but later it will be his descendants will follow suit, and they will do just as God tells them in the order in which God commands them. And hopefully after this, it says, and this is a lasting ordinance, right? Because this is eventually what Jesus will do. He will be the atonement for all people, for all time, for all sins. And it will be done the way that the Lord commands it for all time. That's why it talks about it being a lasting ordinance for you, this atonement. Very interesting. And lastly, we hear about Exodus, about the laws of justice. I think this kind of smacks in the face of what's going on right now. We often say that we need to worry about the poor in all things. But God says, don't deny justice for the poor people. But it also says here in verse 3, which is very interesting, and do not show favoritism to a poor man in a lawsuit. So we need to be even-handed. God calls us that real justice is not where you favor one over another. You favor that who is righteous. Poor people can be unrighteous and righteous. Rich people can be righteous and unrighteous. It's not necessarily that we take favoritism for the poor, even though more often than not, the poor are the ones who are left out of the agreement. But it says God does not accept bribes, and he does not allow for his word to be twisted. He says, do not oppress the alien in your land, but be just. Just doesn't know whether poor or rich, colored, you name it, right? There's no one thing that God shows favoritism. He shows favoritism to the righteous. Why? Because they deserve the justice due to them. Then we hear about the Sabbath laws, leaving the fields open for the 7th year. And so then everyone gets a rest. The festival of unleavened bread, the festival of harvest, the festival of ingathering. And then we hear about this angels preparing the way for the people of God to come through. That God says he will bless them if they walk alongside them, but he has many very strict stipulations. The biggest one is it says, do not let them live in your land with you, not because that God hates certain people, but strictly because it says at the very end, don't let them live in the land because their sins against me, their worship of other gods will certainly ensnare you. We have to really think about this when we think about who we are allowing into our lives. You might say, well, that's being too exclusive, but there is a point where you need to be exclusive. You need to be careful of who you let into your households, into the parts of your community that may be doing things that will cause for people to fall away, to stray from righteousness. And so we have to be very careful about who we welcome into our inner circles, because they can cause us to sin by their unrighteousness. And this is what God is saying. And unfortunately, the people of Israel do not take heed to this lesson, and they end up having to wander the desert for a very long time. So may we learn from those lessons and know that when we surround ourselves with people who build us up in the righteousness of God. That is my prayer for you today. May you pray for me as we go through this Bible in a year. Thank you for joining us today. You're much blessing to me, and I hope that this word might be a blessing for you. Take care. Goodbye.